Greetings, my beautiful lovelies. I'm coming to you from the art room again today. Except today, I'm dressed in my early period Ankharet verch Meredudd's persona garb. The reason I'm doing that is that this video is kind of a background construction conglomeration video of what project I've been working on in the last 2 months. It was a commission for a friend who, for lack of a better term, leveled up in the SCA and she became a pelican. There's a lot of instructional stuff that I'm hoping to do some videos in the future to explain all the intricacies and ins and outs of the SCA so that you have a little bit better idea of what that is. But today I want to talk about a kirtle and a gown that I made for my friend Sofia. Sofia is near and dear to my heart. She is a cadet sister to my partner Vilef under Albion, who is a traveling bard, and I wanted to make sure that I was able to make something for her that she felt like the most spectacular woman of the day. I wanted to make sure that she felt beautiful and elegant and that she shone in her ceremony. But I want to go over how the gown was made and how I went around the process. So up on the screen, you should see a picture of the gown that she chose. And we're going to go through and we're going to dissect the gown a little bit so that you can see where I went to in my head in the construction of this gown. Now I had 2 months to do this, so there's a little bit of limiting factor. I knew that I wouldn't be able to have the time to do as much of the handwork as I would maybe have done if I had had a little bit more time, but I knew that the materials of the gown mattered. I did talk Sofia into using silk for this gown, and I know that that made a big difference in how the gown came out. We're going to look at the whole thing. So there's a floral print on the outside of the gown, but there's also a printed fabric on the inside that you can see both on the chest piece as well as the skirt piece that peeks out underneath the gown. And that's the kirtle. The gown, or I've heard it called a veste, but I'm not sure if that's entirely correct. It has puffed sleeves, and I've done puffed sleeves before, so I was not intimidated by that. The gown, though, has a grown color, so it grows out of the gown and is this beautiful arching thing behind the head. There is linen decorating the inside of the collar. One of the things I noticed on the collar is that it looks like there are 4 layers of very detailed gold work, needle lace or embroidery done in 4 layers of very, very fine silk or linen, probably linen, and then layered inside that collar. Now, I say linen versus silk because we know historically that many of the collars or partlets on these gowns were linen so they could be washed regularly because you could not necessarily wash the gown itself. The next thing was the sleeves. Now the sleeves have this spiral pattern and it looks like the sleeve is made and then these spirals are layered on top of it. I took a slightly different approach. That's what it looks like, so what's going on, and then there's a band around the bottom that anchors that. It also looks like the shift underneath that peeks out of the sleeves looks like they are finely detailed embroidered linen that peek out underneath the sleeves. Now the construction of the sleeves, I went into pretty big detail on my iPad and I drew over it, and hopefully I will have the ability to put that picture here. Maybe. So what I noticed is that the sleeve has a slightly curved shape to it. The sleeve cap has a cap and then it has these strips of fabric and then fabric puffing out between them. And I knew that there were 2 layers of puffs, but I wasn't certain I was going to be able to get the fine puffs underneath based on time. Also deconstructing the gown, I noticed that the lines from the top going down, because originally it kind of looked like the bodice was on that gown was fitted, and then it was just open. And I actually went back, I did a little bit of digging in my Janet Arnold Patterns of Fashion book, this one right here. And if you see, there's a gown right here. I actually went back, because I made that gown one year, and I went back to that gown pattern and I really looked at what would that look like if you cinched it. And I discovered that that gown pattern matched very much what I was seeing in this picture. So that was pretty much the gown pattern that I used. I did drape it though, instead of just patterning it from the book. What I did with the kirtle is I built a basic bodice that fits in the back and in the front so that it's really comfortable. And I boned the bottom part of the bodice so that it would have that structure when she's standing, but also maintain that structure when she sat down. I pleated the front of the fabric and attached that to the bodice, and then I cartridge pleated, so box pleating in the front and cartridge pleating in the back. And she has side ties, and they angle just a smidge to maintain that shape, so they angle a little bit towards the front, so they help keep it loose around the belly but still structured and hold everything in place up top. The other thing about the side is that with those side openings, she can wear external pockets if she wanted to. I basically flat pleated it, that whole front part of the bodice, and then where it stops is where the side lacing is. All the side lacing is done in eyelets, and very tiny eyelets, which then I put metal rings on the other side of the eyelet on the inside, so that no matter how much you tug and pull on it, those eyelets have structure. That's not something that's necessarily done historically that I've been able to find, but it is a modern technique that I find works really well for maintaining that eyelet size, as well as, so this is a trick that I've talked about with people, but I don't know that I've talked about it on my YouTube channel, is when you have those huge rectangular pieces of fabric that are flatlined and you're going to figure out how long they need to be, I don't do length from the bottom. I do length from the waist or from the bottom of the kirtle. So the whole thing is flatlined, and then I pin it where it needs to be attached to the bodice, and I look at where it's even. That keeps you from having to, well, a couple things. It makes sure that when you flatline it with canvas or anything that you want to give the bottom of the dress quite a bit of structure, that maintains that structure, and then you're not fiddling with curves and all these other things when you're trying to hem it. The other thing is that your waist is what creates that height and depth of where you need that flatness to be, or that evenness of the hem. So if you hem it at the waist and not at the floor, you get a more even hem with all those yards of fabric, because both of those panels were over 1.5 yards. I know the front panel was 1.5 yards and the back panel was 1 yard and 3, not quite 1 3/4 yards of fabric all the way around that you want to hem even. It's so much easier to just treat that as a flat, even, straight line, and then you pin at the kirtle edge, at that bodice edge, and that will give you all the variances, and yet the bottom is even. So it's just a tip. That's what I do. Not every costumer does it that way, but that's what I do. So what I did with the sleeves is I made a mock-up of the sleeves. The mock-up of her sleeves is actually this. So I took a basic sleeve pattern and I laid out strips that then when the fabric is sewn together, it looks like that spiral. And the way I did this is I created a blank sheet mock-up. I sewed it together, and then I drew on it. I drew on it with pen. And once I had that done, then all I did was laid out that floral fabric, and that floral fabric is this stuff. The floral fabric is something like, is this. And then I laid over the silk in this pattern on the sleeve. I laid it out, pinked it on the edge, and then laid trim along that top silk. So the strips were pinked, and then that trim was laid over the top in that pattern that matches this. And then I lined the sleeves with linen, and they're lined, but they're tacked in. So all she has to do is pick it out and wash the linen and then reinsert the linen lining in the sleeves. Because we didn't want to interline the sleeves because then it was going to be too hot. We were really concerned that at this event it was going to be really hot because the exorbitantly difficult hot weather we've had this year. All the linen is something that can be picked out. They're box pleated all the way around, and then I tacked on some lace on the top of them, and they are tacked into the sleeve right underneath the cuff at the bottom. So all she has to do is pick those out and pick the lining out of the sleeve and wash the whole thing, and she'll be golden. In the kirtle, it is entirely lined in a cotton linen blend, and the bodice has just a couple channels of boning in it, and that's it to give it structure. So it's 2 layers of kind of sturdy cotton fabric that has the boning channels in it, and then this fabric is laid over the outside so that you don't see the boning channels in the silk, which was really fun to do. Next comes the gown. The gown was pieced in a very detailed method. I draped it on her, and the collar at the front is actually one piece that's attached to the front. So it's one whole piece. And the reason I did that is I knew that I was going to have to use boning on the front to angle through into that collar to give it that structure so that it stood up. When I draped it, I knew that I had to have that back final collar piece at the back, and I tacked that on when I did the fitting. So when I went back and was working with the silk, I knew that I was going to have to create structure on the inside of those 2 silk pieces. And I did so. I put 4 small synthetic whalebone channels in there and put those in there, got the whole thing put together. And as I'm watching it on the dress form, the collar stands up really nicely and then it just wilts back. And I thought, well, that's not going to be sufficient. So I ended up taking some scrap silk and some zip ties, actually the 1/4-inch zip ties. And I ended up creating 2 boning channels, and I stuck 2 of those together or side by side in a piece of silk, and I tacked those to the back of that collar so that goes all the way up. And boy, that collar stands up really nicely from the backside, and you can see that in the pictures. The other thing that I did was I used this book, the Janet Arnold Patterns of Fashion, and on page 45 in the Janet Arnold book, there's this small image right here. See that cup looking like thing? That's where the boning is laid out in the puff of that sleeve. So I did the same thing along the arch, the biggest puff. There's a small piece of synthetic whalebone that runs all the way across. And then I did 2 bones that meet in the middle right at the edge of that arch. And that creates that puff on that sleeve, almost like this. See that? And then I made little tabs to go off of that for the cuff. So the tabs in the cuff are all one piece, and then they're attached to the sleeve, and that sleeve has a puff. And then what I did for the top puff is those are individual tabs that are sewn. So what I ended up doing is I took these little silk tubes that I ironed flat, and I cut them a little shorter, so they're only about this big when they're sewed to the gown. And then in the middle of that, I ran a little bit of lace. And so this is what's on the inside. This is what is sewn at the top of that puff of that sleeve, and then there's lace in between that, and that's what's run and then sewed completely into the sleeve before it's put into the arm's eye of the gown. And it turned out absolutely beautiful. I did make sure that there was quite a bit of extra room in the sleeves to fit the undersleeve that's attached to the kirtle. Those spiral sleeves that I showed you, like the sample, those are actually tacked directly to the kirtle, and then the gown goes on over the top of that. For her first part of her ceremony, she wanted just plain linen sleeves. So I did make a separate pair of linen sleeves that tie onto the kirtle. Combination of several things. She can wear that kirtle as its own garment with those white sleeves for anything that she wants to, especially if it's warm outside. But then she has the option to put on the fancy sleeves if she wants to wear the kirtle with just the fancy sleeves for something. And then also on top of that, she has the gown to put on. The collar, what I ended up settling with the collar was taking fine linen and attaching lace all the way around it. And I did have to piece the linen inside that collar to lay flat and all the way down that front, like you can see in the photograph. For some reason, I thought I could just use one swath of linen, but that didn't work. I actually had to cut it and piece it so that it laid flat inside that collar. And I have no idea why I didn't pick up on that the first time, but that's what I ended up doing. And that is tacked on to the gown collar. And all she has to do is pick those fine threads out, wash her linen collar, and then she can stitch it back into the silk collar. So anything that's white, other than the puffs that are attached to the sleeves, all those things can be removed and washed because that silk is not washable. That is silk taffeta. And she chose a beautiful silk taffeta for it. It's a shot, it's a blue shot with black taffeta, so it has this wonderful sheen to it. So that's pretty much how I did it. The trim that goes along the whole outside of the garment, I got a really good lucky buy on this trim, and I bought a whole bunch of it for this dress. And that goes all the way around the back of the collar, down all the way around the bottom of the gown. And we also used it on the sleeves, and it was just the right amount. Didn't have any extra left over except this little bit. You've seen, and you can see the final pictures, and the gentleman that is escorting her in this ceremony is my partner Vilev. The doublet outfit that he's wearing is his relaxed doublet outfit. It's blue linen from fabricstore.com. Oh, all the silk, the embroidered silk, I'm not sure where that was from, but the silk taffeta came from silkbaron.com. And the linen in his outfit is from fabricstore.com. The doublet is all hand embroidered in runic. So I make all of his outfits. And now I've made this beautiful outfit for Sofia. And I'm so happy that she was so happy with it. And she's beautiful and it's lovely. That I apologize to my audience. I did not have the chance to film any of the making or the draping. I have lots of pictures and I've posted those as we've gone through. It was a beautiful gown for a beautiful woman that was so well deserving, and I wanted her to shine. And that's the other reason I didn't film the process, because it wasn't really something that I felt I needed to make an entire video series out of. It would have taken a lot of extra time in filming, because when you film, when you make something and you film it, you have to stop and set up the camera and set up the lighting, and you have to stop when there's not good lighting. And then you have to edit the bajiminies out of it. And I just didn't have time to do that. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you so much for watching the making and the inspiration. And thank you, Sofia. Thank you so much for letting me make your stepping up gown. It was a joy to be able to provide you something that you just shone. So thank you, audience, and you have a beautiful day, and I will see you again in another video. Blessed be.